Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back and I thought I'd do another fun video on this beautiful day. Why not stay inside and instead make content for YouTube? Let's talk about C. So you see this background image here. I spent like all of 5 minutes making it in Fireworks. It probably looks a little off center, but whatever. So all of this might seem kind of overwhelming, maybe a little confusing. And I'm going to break it all down for you really, really slow here. See, we're going to be working in C major. And let me just pull up here the C major scale. So in order for us to find the C major scale, we need to follow a simple sequence. Now, if you play an instrument, you might have heard of this sequence. It's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's how I remember it, and that's how I was taught when I was learning guitar. But in the sense of FL Studio, I thought it would be a little simpler if we just used numbers. So we're going to go 221, 2221. That's the sequence I want you to burn into your memory, because that's going to be used to find any kind of scale. Well, at least the seven modes of whatever key you're working in. And we'll get into that like later. But basically, all you really need to know about this sequence is by using 221, 2221, we can find our major scale in any key with any note. So let's start with C. Now, if you know anything about music already, you know that C major is literally just all of these white keys starting on C. So we're going to go through and find C major, and then I'm going to show you how you can use that to find a different major scale. So let's start counting. First step, let me turn off the sustain. The first step is to lay down our root note, and that is C. So now we start counting. One note, two notes, that gives us D. One note, two notes, that gives us E. And then one note, which is F. So there's our 2, 2, 1. Now we do a 2, 2, 2, 1. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So there we go. We have our C major scale. So we can use this formula here, this sequence, to find the major scale anywhere. So let's find the major scale for, I don't know. Let's just pick, let's pick A. We'll do A major. How about that? So we start at A. Now let's start counting. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Now, when I was placing those notes, it sounded like the major scale to me, but there's a way we can double check and just be sure. You can highlight your scale, and we're just going to drag it up to C. And does it line up with all of our white keys? Yes, it does. So that's the major scale. Now, you can literally just write out the major scale in C, and then, like we just double checked with, you can drag it anywhere. You know, this would be the major scale for, this would be F sharp major, or maybe G flat major. Sharps and flats are kind of interchangeable. So, you know, we could do that, but that won't really help you understand music like on a fundamental level. So if you're making music, you know, if you're in the music production mindset and mode, that is perfectly fine to do if that is what you have to do. As well as use these stamps. There's some really nice little, like, you know, goes into the different scales, our basic chords, and then we go into advanced chords. All those are really, really nice, handy features to have. But I don't want you to rely on those because, like, let's say for whatever reason, you know, you fall off a horse and get some brain damage and you decide, I'm going to go to Ableton, or, you know, you want to use Pro Tools or something, then, yeah, I want you to be able to use this information, take this musical knowledge with you wherever, even if you decide, I'm just going to learn how to play ukulele or something. You know, I want you to be able to understand music without having to rely on these tools. So while those tools are nice, I want you to focus on learning this stuff and use those tools as reference to help you double check your work. All right, so we have our C major scale. Great. Now, how are we going to go and find our chords in C major? Well, there's a little counting trick. There's counting tricks with all of this stuff, and I feel like it's pretty easy to visualize and count this stuff in FL Studio. So we're going to use these numbers again, and what we're going to do is we're going to build what's called triads. Triads, it's just like the name implies. It is a 3-note chord. Very, very simple chords. So we do 1, 3, and our 5. So let's make our C major chord. So all of these white lines are the notes of C major. So let's just count this out. We start with our 1, skip the 2, go to the 3, skip the 4, go to our 5. So 1, 3, and 5. And that's what makes up our C major triad, which is C, E, and G. So there we go. We have our first chord. Now let's do that for the next note, which is D. So here's our D. Skip the second, go to the third. Skip the fourth, go to the fifth. That's D, F, and A. So I'm going to show you, I just want to illustrate here that these are actually two different types of chords, even though we follow the same 1, 3, 5 sequence. So right here, we have our C, E, and G. That is C major. Now we have C, D sharp, and G. That is our that is our C minor. So let me just play the difference for you guys here. You can hear how one sounds brighter, the other one sounds a little more dull. That is because the minor chords have a flattened third. There's a simple counting trick for finding if your chord is major or minor. So I've written these out here, and then the special one I'll talk about in a second. So here's how we can count this out and see if it is major or minor. So we start with our 1, right? Here's our C. So now we start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's our E. 1, 2, 3. All right, so that's how we can count if it's major. 4 spaces between the 1 and the 3, and 3 spaces between the 3 and the 5. So 4, 3 equals major. And it is the reversed for the minor. So let's count out our minor. 1, 2, 3. Now we're at D sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're at G. So remember, 4, 3 equals major, 3, 4 equals minor. Now I included another chord here. This is one we're going to touch on a little bit today. This is called a diminished chord. As you can see, it's kind of similar to the minor, where that third is flattened, but the fifth is also flattened. If you want to count out how a chord will be, how you'll know if a chord will be diminished, it's 3, 3. So here we go. Let's count this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So there we go. That is our B diminished. Now this chord here is very, very tense. So let's listen to what a diminished chord sounds like. Yeah, you've probably heard that. That's like your stereotypical, like, uh-oh, something just went down in TV shows sounds, you know. Bam. So this is major, this is minor, this is diminished. And then I guess I'll show you one more. No, I don't want to overwhelm you. We'll talk about augmented chords later. That might be a fun little study for you to do. Why don't you use this stamp tool and go to your augmented chord, lay it down, and figure out what qualities make it augmented. Yeah. So anyways, let's talk about our chords in C. What I've done is I've written them all out here. And I will tell them to you now. We just did 1, 3, 5 for each of these, and then now we have our chords. So we have C major, D minor, E minor, and then we have F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then we're back home at C. So I've written these out here on the background. So these Roman numerals, we use these for like numerical analysis on in music, because really, if we were to write out these chords, we could figure out, if we know music theory, like, oh, how would I transpose that to A? Um, but relatively speaking, the notes that we're playing don't really matter. Now, when it comes to music, I mean, there's a long discussion as to why um, what notes we play don't necessarily matter. As far as what key we're in, you might have heard before, oh, D minor, that's the saddest key of all. That is purely subjective. Personally, I don't think it really matters. It's kind of up to you subjectively to determine how music feels. But when it comes to analysis, it doesn't really matter what key we're in necessarily. Um, so when I say, oh, I like a C major to E minor to F major to G major kind of progression, well, you'd be able to, it'd be much simpler if you say, oh, I like a major first, minor third, major fourth, major fifth, and people will understand what you're talking about. Uh, so while this information down here, the notes don't necessarily matter, it's this information up here that is more important than this. So that's why we use these Roman numerals. You might have seen these around before and had no clue what they meant. So that's what they mean. The uppercase means major, the lowercase means minor, and then this one, it is uppercase, but it doesn't mean major. It has a little degree symbol here. That means it is a diminished chord. So let's talk about harmonic functions. Um, I've color coded all of these here because it will help me better illustrate the functions of harmony in um, in a diatonic chord progression, but really in a chord progression in major, in Ionian mode. This will cover like 90% of music, at least mainstream pop music that you'll hear. If you listen to like the pop stations, like the top 40 hits, they will follow these harmonic functions. Even some rap songs I know follow these harmonic functions, even though they typically tend to be in minor keys. This will pretty much apply to major. So we'll talk about how we can use harmonic functions in minor and stuff at a different time. But I really want to focus on major. So the three functions, it is our tonic, our predominant, or subdominant, whatever you want to call it, and our dominant. So these are the three functions here of harmony. So our tonic, this is kind of our home base. This is like where we start. It's where we're settled. And then our predominant, the name implies what it is. It gets us ready. It takes us somewhere. It wants to take us to the dominant. And the dominant wants to take us back home to the tonic. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you. I want you to ignore all these other numbers for right now. We're focusing on the 1 and the 5. So the G major here, the 5, that is our dominant. It wants to take us back to C. And I'll show you here audibly what I mean. So I'm going to play the G major chord. So let's hear how this sounds. So the idea is G major has a lot of tension and it wants to go somewhere. And it wants to go back to C major. Doesn't that just sound good? So that's kind of like the basis of this whole concept of harmonic function, is this tension and then resolution. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve musically. That right here, this 5-to-1, that is called a cadence, and we'll get into cadences later. But right now I just kind of want to touch over each of these chords' functions. So let's talk about the tonic functions. I've written them out here. It is C major, E minor, and A minor. All of these serve, or C major, E minor, A minor. All of these serve as kind of a home base function, anyways, in a chord progression. It's where the tension goes to. And then we have our predominant functions here, which is D minor and F major. And these kind of get us ready for the dominant functions, although they don't always have to. That's kind of the fun of being a musician, is determining where our chord progressions take us. So that's up to you to decide, but typically they take us to the dominant. And let's play our dominant chord. Oh, hit the wrong one. Let's play our dominant chords here, which is G major, and here's our B diminished. Now these both of these serve a dominant function, and they have a lot of tension, and that tension needs to get resolved, and then they go back to a tonic function. So you can see how, well, yes, you could go 1 4 5 1. You could even go 1 4 5 6. Before we start making some chord progressions, I want to talk a little bit about cadences. So our cadences are, think of them as, okay, so we had our 5-1 here, right? Our dominant to our resolution, our tonic. So cadences kind of are ways you can end your chord progressions. And you can end them, instead of ending it always on a period, which is this is a perfect cadence. It's what I went over a lot. It is our 5-1. Let's just hear how this sounds. You know, that's what you heard a lot. It's the perfect cadence. I think of this more like a period at the end of a sentence. You know, it kind of ends the conversation, or it ends the dialogue. And so that is a way to use it. Here is an example of a 1 4 5 1 progression written out. These are still the same chords. It is still C major, F major, G major, and C major. I just use alternate voicings to make it sound a little better. So let's hear what this 1 4 5 1 sounds like. So you hear how that had that G major to C major ending. That is an example of using a perfect cadence. And while it uses the 5-1, it feels complete. That line feels complete. It can keep going, but it sounds fine enough as is. And then we have a plagal cadence, which is often referred to as a amen cadence, and that is a 4-1. Now, it doesn't always have to be a 4-1. It could be any of your predominant functions. So it could be a 4-1, or it could be a 2-1. It could be a D minor 7th to C major. It doesn't really matter. It is our predominant going to our tonic. So let's hear how this function will sound, this cadence will sound. This is the amen cadence. So you see, it doesn't really sound like there's all that tension here. Sounds like there's about, I don't know. There's just not nearly as much tension as the 5-1. This is the 5-1. Now here is the 4-1. So, I kind of like the amen cadence. It's utilized a lot in like blues and I guess like gospel music. I don't really listen to gospel music though. So here's an example of a chord progression utilizing the amen cadence as a 1-5-4-1. So it's C major to G major to F major to C major. Let's hear how this sounds. Again, just using alternate voicings here. So you can see how it feels like it wants to keep going, at least in my opinion. It doesn't sound so resolute, So yeah, let's talk about our imperfect cadence. Now there are more cadences than these 4, but these are the most typical 4. So this is our imperfect cadence. This is our half cadence. it is any note going to the 5. And by that I mean ending on the 5. So it doesn't matter what notes are being played before. If it ends on the dominant or the dominant function, which would be our B diminished, if it ends on that note or on that chord, then it is a half cadence because it ends on tension. You have all this tension built up, but no resolution, and it just kind of wants to keep going. So this is a chord progression. It is a 1, 4, minor 6, dominant. So let's see here. This is C major to F major to A minor, and then G major. So let's hear how this sounds. So yeah, you hear how it doesn't really sound resolved right here. It just kind of, it feels like it wants to go somewhere else. That is the purpose of this cadence. And so now we have our deceptive cadence. Now this one's kind of fun. This is our dominant. Instead of the dominant, all of the tension resolving to the tonic, it resolves anywhere else but the tonic. So it can resolve to one of the tonic functions. But if it doesn't resolve back to the tonic and tricks us, then it is a deceptive cadence. So let's hear an example of a deceptive cadence. Right here, I wrote this chord progression out. It is a 1, 4, 5, 6. And let's just hear how this sounds. So you see, it's like it's setting us up for another go around. See, I kind of, and to my ears, I expect this. If I heard this for the first time on a radio, I would expect something like this. I'd expect the chord progression to sound a little bit like that. Obviously different voicings, but that's how I'd expect the harmony to sound, is a 1, 4, 5, 1. So instead, we end, while ending on a tonic function, we're not ending on the tonic. And I feel like that sets us up for another go around. So this is how I would use this, is I would go through this once and then 1, 4, 5, 1. And then that will make it sound complete. So let's hear it. So you can see how you can use that cadence to kind of trick our listeners into, I guess, just kind of trick their expectations, and set them up for another go around. So, so I thought I would talk a little bit about the secret chord, and that secret chord is C major. So what do I mean? Well, you probably heard that song Hallelujah before at one point, and it's a good song, and not just because it was on Shrek, but because it's kind of clever. Now that we know all this about harmonic functions, I want you to look at this sequence here. There's a fun line where it says it goes like this: the 4th, the 5th, and then the minor fall and the major lift. So it's kind of fun because he's saying it starts on C and he's like, it goes like this, and then he says the 4th, the 5th. So he's saying it's the major 4th to the major 5th, and then the line says it's the minor fall. So it's kind of fun because it's like kind of deceptive, because we expect it to go, but it doesn't. It's like that. He's using a deceptive cadence. And then it sets up to repeat. So when he's saying it goes like this, he's starting on the tonic, and then the 4th, and then the 5th, the minor fall, and the major lift. So the A minor is letting us down, and the F major is raising us up. So I just thought that was a pretty a fun little line that I can appreciate as a musician, and hopefully now you can appreciate that line too, because it's just kind of really fun. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of harmonic functions, I thought, like, hey, let's just build a chord progression, and let's use what we've learned here. Let's see if we can apply some of this knowledge. Now, you can use this stuff to make any kind of a song. I do film scoring, and you'll be surprised to know that you can do a lot of this stuff in film scoring, because film scoring doesn't really have to be that complicated musically. In fact, you don't always want it to be complicated. Obviously, depending on the project, you kind of want it to be simple. You don't want to distract the watcher. So, like depending on the project, you could probably get away with playing something like a 1-4-5-1. Maybe someone's really depressed and they're walking through the city. It's all black and white, and you need some slow, sad piano music. So, I would play something like this. You know what I mean? You could get away with something that simple. And then if you want to make the world's hottest pop song, you could do something like a it has a lot of different uses. So don't think you're stuck to just making cheesy pop or techno or house music. You can make whatever you want with this. With these, you can make classical music too if you want. You can even make beats. There's that song that Kyle and Lil Yachty did together. I think it's called "I Spy." Now I don't believe they use a dominant in that chord progression, but it's literally just the 1-2-3-2. So I'll show you. I'll show you right here. It goes something like this. You know what I mean? So, yeah, you don't always have to follow the harmonic functions, all the rules, but you can see how it's home base and then it goes somewhere. And where's that somewhere? It's back home. And then home base gets taken somewhere. Where's that somewhere? Back home. So, that's kind of where you can kind of shine as a creative individual and make things your own. So, let's just build a standard kind of chord progression that we might hear in, I don't know, maybe a piano ballad or something. I really don't know. I don't know what kind of chord progression we're going to make. Um, so let's do something that, let's go C major, and then we'll go to one of our predominant functions. So let's go F major. And then let's go, I guess, back to C major. And then let's go to our G major. But I don't want to move a whole lot. And then let's go to our A minor. And then, so that's our tonic. And then let's end it on a standard 2-5-1. So we'll go tonic to our supertonic, which is a predominant function. So D, F, A. Let's figure out what voicing I want to use. There's our 2. Let's go to our dominant, which would be... So I don't know how this will sound, but let's just see how this will sound. So, I mean, there you go. I built that blind. I had no clue what that would sound like, and I just stuck to our harmonic functions, and we were able to build this chord progression. Now, one thing I will tell you is that chord progressions cannot be copywritten. So feel free to steal this or, take inspiration from some of your favorite artists. See what you come up with. So, yeah, that is how you would go about building a chord progression utilizing these harmonic functions. So, yeah, let's talk about some homework here. I'm going to give you guys some homework here. I showed you guys how to build your major and minor triads, as well as your diminished. I showed you guys the 1, 3, 5, right? And that's how we build our triads. I want you to tell me how we would build our 7th chords and our 9th chords. I don't want you to look it up. I want you to just leave a comment down below. Because if you tell me what it is, if you say, oh, it's just these notes, that's you don't have an understanding of how you went about finding it. I want you to type out what would you do in order to find your 7th chords, and do not say use the stamp tool. 7th chords are really cool. I'll play some for you. So that 2-5-1 that we did, see, in jazz, a lot of times they don't really use standard triads. Most of the time their standard chords would be 7th chords. So I'll show you what the 2-5-1 sounds like with 7th chords. So, I mean, that sounds nice and jazzy and smooth. That sounds like if you were to sample that and put a beat on there, well, there you go, dude. There's your next lo-fi hip-hop track right there. So, yeah. I feel like next time we could talk about some really fun, crazy concepts like our secondary dominance. Yeah, okay, yeah. This could be fun too. Okay, so what I'm going to do, so what a secondary dominant is it is your dominance dominant. And in this case, it would be G major's dominant. And that's the only really hint I'm going to give you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this chord progression. It is going to be our tonic, our secondary dominant, to our dominant, and then to our mediant, our minor third. So this is what the chord progression is going to sound like, and I want you to tell me what is the secondary dominant. And so I will tell you that it's going to be G major's dominant. There's a really easy way to figure this out, but I want you to work through it so you really understand everything I taught you here. So let's figure out this chord progression. It'll sound like this. Tonic, secondary dominant, to our dominant, to our minor third. So you see how that sounds? That sounds really cool, right? Doing this, suddenly we're no longer, I guess this is another hint. A diatonic, these all have been diatonic chord progressions, okay? All that means is all of these notes have been within the key of C, meaning no sharps and flats. When we start diving into secondary dominance, we are no longer diatonic. Well, there you go. There's another little hint. We're no longer diatonic. There's something extra there. So what is that extra, and what is that chord? So yeah, leave a comment down below if you figured it out. Try not to use Google, because I mean, who cares if you seem really smart on a YouTube videos comment section? I'm trying to get you to work through this and understand it yourself. So you're only cheating yourself out of knowledge, because there's no prize. So yeah, check out some of these popular chord progressions. I've color coded them down here, and you can see how their functions relate to each other. There's a lot of variations here of what I call, these are kind of what I call 4, 5, 6 progressions. Okay, so it's our subdominant to our dominant, and our submediant here. These kind of get switched around, and these can be really in any order we want. One of the most, this is actually referred to as the pop chord progression. and it is a 1-5-6-4. This is just one of many variations of what I call a 4-5-6 progression, because these can be in any order really. So this is you've heard this a million times. This is a 1-5-6-4. So yeah, that's all kind of variations. It's just different orders. So yeah, come up with some of your own chord progressions. See what you come up with. Maybe next time we'll talk about. I talked a little bit about. I might have mentioned it once or twice. Something about modes. So by using this 2-2-1 2-2-2-1 sequence, we can kind of figure out the different modes of major, and that would be something like Dorian mode, Phrygian mode, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, which is also called minor, and our Locrian, which is based off the diminished chord. And then they each have their own special chord progressions. They don't really follow the harmonic functions like major does, but what we can do is we can make chord progressions that borrow chords from our other modes. So instead of having something like a 1-5-4-1, we can do a 1-5-4 to a minor 4. Let's see how that would sound. I'll play the 1-5-4-1 now. So that is our diatonic chord progression. That is using all the notes that we have here in front of us. But let's spice this up and let's use a minor 4. Dominant, major 4, minor 4. Yeah, so you see how that sounds. That's pretty cool. So maybe I'll show you guys how we can find those chords to substitute in and borrow at another video. So anyways, guys, I hope all this was very useful for you. I hope I explained myself clearly enough, and I hope this was all very easy to grasp. I wanted to kind of utilize FL Studio to show you guys some of these ideas of music theory. So anyway, if you have any questions, please leave them down below. If I went too fast for you, if you want me to expand upon something I talked about today, let me know. And then also, remember, you do have homework. I want you to comment down below and tell me, 1, how would I find the 7th chords? And 2, what is my secondary dominant? What is that secondary dominant chord? What are the notes of that chord? How... I guess you don't have to tell me how you went about finding it, because how we found this dominant is how we'll find the secondary dominant. So there you go. There's something I want you to explore. And it should be really fun. Hopefully you find all this stuff fun. I find all this stuff very fun. So anyways, guys, until next time, peace. We'll burn one.